I'm so glad to see so many people here for the Lunch and Learn. We welcome you. Today, we welcome Susan Esche back today. We're so glad she's here. She's going to talk to us about gardening, which we all, I know, are getting ready to go out. We can hardly wait, right, to work in our gardens.
The gardening year, I'm going to start the presentation with spring, just because it is spring. There's not much point in me telling you right now what I did in January, because January's gone. So we're going to start with today. The first thing I want to point out is spring has two faces in Northwest Arkansas. The one on the left is the one we dream about. I actually took those pictures down in Hot Springs a couple of years ago at Gardener Gardens. And the one on the right came from my yard, the frozen crocus. So when you garden up in this part of the world, I was talking to one of the ladies earlier, and I said, you just got to hedge your bets. You plant a bunch of things, and some of them are going to do well one year, and then the next year something else is going to do well. But there are some tips and tricks that at least will help. So let's go through. Okay, how many of you have done soil tests so far this year? I see one hand up, huh? Does everybody know where to take your dirt to get a free soil test? Okay, you can get soil tests done for free in Arkansas, and we'll talk about a little more about how to do it in just a minute. Sorry, that's the next slide. But this is the time of year to do the soil test. If you haven't done one already, then do it. We can do it tomorrow. Do it in July, but try to get a soil test done at least every other year on your garden. So you keep up with what the soil needs, and even more importantly, it keeps you from putting out fertilizer you don't need, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. This is a good time of year to plant your cool season annuals. We're almost really past planting pansies. Well, you can plant them now, but they're only going to be pretty for about 6 weeks, and then it's probably going to get too hot for them. So if I was going to go out and buy a bunch of annuals today, I'm not sure pansies are what I'd spend my money on, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. But pansies, peas, good time to plant radishes, still a good time to plant onions and turnips. This is a good time of year to plant trees and shrubs that are less cold hardy, like figs, azaleas, roses, and fruit trees. They always used to say, oh, plant in the fall because you don't have to water as much, and that's true, but we have had temperatures down below zero for the last 5 winters. And if you plant something that's borderline hardy and you plant it in the fall just before it gets really cold, you're a lot more likely to lose it. So I'm recommending to people that if you've got something that is somewhat less cold hardy, that you do a spring planting instead, which, yes, it does mean you're going to water more this summer, but if you can get those roots well established before that cold weather hits in January, the plant's a lot more likely to make it. Good time to plant strawberries. We're kind of at the tail end of planting bare root trees and shrubs. I actually like to plant those about a month earlier than this, but you can still plant them if you've got some or there's something you want, and the only way you can get it is as a bare root. Now you want to leave your spring blooming perennials and bulbs alone until they finish blooming. Don't go out and tie your daffodil foliage in a knot because they won't bloom as pretty for you next year. Just leave those alone. Also, this is not a great time to move bulbs. I would give them another month, wait until they're really looking ugly if you need to move them before you pick them up and move them. Also, if you go visit someplace like Y Mountain, etc., to see their bulbs, and they try to sell you some daffodil bulbs in the spring, I wouldn't do it. They might make it, but those things have been dug since fall, and they are not going to be sending up their green foliage at the best time of year for them. They might live, but I think it would be several years before they would bloom for you again. More spring chores. This is the time to plant your summer and your fall blooming perennials. If you can find things like asters, this is a great time to plant them. Mums, this is a great time to plant them. You say, oh, but they're not blooming yet. Yeah, but they're gonna get nice and big and lush, so in the fall, when they do bloom, you're gonna have a fantastic show of them. This is a good time to dig and divide summer and fall blooming perennials that have become crowded. Again, you know, if you've got some of your grandma's hardy repeating mums and you want them in different places in the yard, this is a great time to dig them up and move them. This is a great time to divide your phlox, your hostas, the things that are really summer and fall plants, because you're giving them time to get established before they would start to flower, before they would start to bloom. You can plant the summer annuals you intend to plant, but you really want to pay attention to the temperatures before you actually buy and plant them. I mean, I know Walmart had impatiens in the garden center last week, but you know what would have happened to them if you planted them too. So I like to scope out who's got what. I like to plan what I'm going to plant, and I might even buy some of it. I must admit, I went to White River Friday and they had some Bidens, which is an annual I like and is very difficult to find. I bought the whole flat, but I took it home, put it in the basement, put it under my grow lights, and it's not going out for 2 more weeks. Now, soil test, I told you we would talk more about this because this is kind of my favorite hobby horse. You can do a soil test any time of year. You don't have to do it in the spring. You want to take your dirt from about the top 6 inches of the area you're testing, and you want to take multiple samples, because if you just go out and get one shovelful out of the yard, I promise you'll get the place where you accidentally dumped fertilizer by mistake last year, and your soil test will be really wonky, and it's like, this doesn't look right. Those people at the extension office must not know what they're doing. Well, if your sample is atypical, your test results will be too. So when we say get multiple samples, okay? If you're testing your yard, get it from multiple areas around your yard, but don't mix your yard sample with your vegetable or flower bed samples, because you know the dirt's different over in the vegetable and flower bed. You went to a lot of trouble to get it different. So you would have a sample for your yard that came with multiple samplings. You would have a test from your vegetable or flower garden, whichever you're testing. And those would be 2 separate samples when you take them in, and they're both going to be free, so there's no reason not to, get as many samples as you think are useful. If your backyard, if the dirt in the backyard is really different from the dirt in the front yard, then have one sample that's front yard and one sample that's backyard. But again, when I say sample, you take some dirt from multiple places in the area that you're going to turn in as one test. You want about a quart. I put it in a Ziploc sandwich bag. You can put it in a paper bag, whatever you want to do. But you want to let this dry out for a couple of days, particularly if the weather's like it was this week. Because when you take that to the extension office, they're going to put it in a cardboard box to mail to get it tested. And if the sample is soppy wet, the cardboard box is going to fall apart, and your sample may or may not make it to Mariana for testing in good shape. So let it dry out. Doesn't have to be powder dry. You don't have to put it in the oven, but you just don't want it soppy wet. Then you're going to take it down to the extension office, and that's at 1204 Southwest 14th Street, Suite 2. Go down 14th Street to Bentonville, go across Walton, go past Aldi's, and it's going to be in the Bogle family building on the right. The public defenders are over there, the road department's over there. If you get to the jail, you've gone too far, come back. Again, it's Suite 2. We planted they used to be all the way down to the far end of the building by where the flagpole was. They're kind of in the middle of the building now. The master gardeners put a couple of pretty flower beds in front of their walkway. But go in there, again, it's a free test. Take your samples in the plastic bag or the paper bag, and they'll have you fill out some paperwork. You'll get your test report back via email. And that's about all there is to it. It's very easy to take your samples down and get them tested. Reading the test report is a different story, and we'll talk about that next. Yes, ma'am.
They told me mine was too dry because my soil was clayish.
Uh-huh.
And they said, we can't test it, you need to give us another sample.
How weird.
Because I thought, and they told me to dig like 2 feet down, like 18 inches down to get the sample.
No,
That's a
that's
whole lot of work.
18 inches down is wrong. It's the top 6 inches, because that's where your,
Sorry.
that's where your roots are. 18 inches down would be like, oh my gosh, if you were doing a compression test to see if your soil was stable enough to put a building on.
You're
That's,
digging a tree.
yeah. Yes, ma'am.
What if you don't have email?
Mine came in the mail.
They send them all out by email now. The last couple of years I've taken it down, it's like you have to have email. You know, you can get a free email address and use do y'all still have email here in the library? So, and if you've got a smartphone, but the library can help you
Yeah.
with an email address,
Yes.
you know? Go down and ask them, but when I have done it the last 4 or 5 times, because I'm the lead volunteer for the botanical gardens, vegetable garden, and have tested their stuff every year for like the last 5 years, and it's always, oh, we gotta have an email address. So, you might need to talk to the library about that. Email addresses are free, and if you don't use it for anything but a soil test, you know, it's probably useful. But, I don't think they'll mail it to you anymore. I think they've gone totally electronic. It takes about 2 weeks to get the test results back. And that's why I say, you know, do it at any time. If you wish you'd done it last month, do it this month. If you don't get around to doing it this month, do it next month. But it's really helpful to have that soil test at least every 2 years so you can keep up with what your ground needs. Don't add lime or balanced fertilizer unless you've tested your soil and you know your soil pH and whether your soil needs phosphorus and potassium. People who just add lime every year can make their soil way too alkaline, because we are on limestone up here. You know, that's why we have caves, and they talk about we're on a karst substrate. So our soil actually tends to be a little bit on the alkaline side anyway. So I would just say, don't add lime unless you know you need it, because you know your pH is wrong. I tested for 3 gardens this year. I tested the botanical garden, I tested mine at home, and I tested the bed over at Helping Hands. And all 3 of them came back and said, all you need is nitrogen. You've got plenty of phosphorus, you've got plenty of potassium. And the reason those tend to be residual in the soil is, A, we've got a lot of clay here, and clay really holds those nutrients well. And B, those are nutrients that tend to just bind to the soil well. The thing about nitrogen is when nitrogen in the soil breaks down, it eventually becomes nitrogen gas, and it gases off into the atmosphere. So you will probably need to add nitrogen to your ground every year. And I would just say, if you didn't get a soil test done and you just can't do one, I would advise you just add nitrogen, because given the native soil up here, and particularly if you've been fertilizing your garden for several years, you probably don't need the other 2 nutrients. Now, when you get your test report, and the next slide is going to be about how to read a test report, it's going to give you results at this many pounds of urea per 1,000 feet of soil. And you say, okay, what the heck is urea, and what if that's not what I use? Urea is listed on these soil reports because it's 46% nitrogen, and it's what most of the commercial farmers use. It's not what most of the home gardeners use. And so you have to do a little math if your result says urea, and I just brought some examples of some nitrogen sources I have used. This one is ammonia nitrate, ammonia sulfate. You can't buy ammonia nitrate anymore because people started blowing up buildings with them, and you have to have a license for it. But you can get ammonia sulfate because it doesn't explode. This is what you want to use if your soil is too alkaline. This is a nice nitrogen source that will lower your pH a little bit. So it's 21%. it's 21% nitrogen. If my soil test says to use urea, which is 46% nitrogen, I'm going to use roughly twice as many pounds per 1,000 square foot of this. Here's another one. This is calcium nitrate, and this is good to use if maybe your soil's a little bit too acid, or if maybe you're having blossom end rot problems with your vegetables, because it puts a little calcium in the soil along with the nitrogen, and it's 15%. So I need about 3 times as many pounds per 1,000 square foot as my soil test recommended for urea. This is a water-soluble organic fertilizer. It's plant-based. It's probably either kelp or alfalfa, the stuff they feed horses. And this would be for somebody who wanted to do organic gardening, somebody who was really didn't want to use synthetics and was opposed to using fish guts because they're vegan. I mean, but this is a good product. It is 13%. So again, divide 46 by 13 and multiply that by the pounds per 1,000 feet that calls for on your soil test. There are multiple sources for nitrogen. Just because your test report says urea doesn't mean that's what you got to use. But you probably are going to need to use some nitrogen every year. Now, when I said be careful about adding too much phosphorus and potassium, that does not apply if you're growing in containers. If you're growing your tomatoes in containers on the deck, you are going to need to put a balanced fertilizer in probably every other time you water all summer. And the reason for that is you have to water a container so much that you're just constantly flooding that soil, and you're washing all the nutrients out. So yes, for a container, you probably are going to need to add a balanced fertilizer. But if you're growing in the ground or you're growing in a raised bed and your soil composition had a lot of just dirt in it when you made it up, probably not going to have to add all 3 nutrients every year. All right, what is the downside of adding all 3 nutrients? If you continuously overadd phosphorus and potassium, you're really contributing to the buildup of nutrients in the lakes here, in the streams. You're contributing to algae growth, and you're wasting your money too. So that's a consideration, because all of us gardeners have something else another plant we wanted to buy, and if we can spend the money on the plant instead of on fertilizer we didn't need, that's a good thing. Okay, let's talk about soil test. Okay, I'm a master gardener, and in my previous life I was a chemist, and I still find this test very confusing to read. I get it every spring, and it's like, oh my Lord, could they possibly have made this harder to read? And so what I will say about soil tests is there's really just 2 parts of that whole document that you really need to look at. So one of them here is your soil pH. And that's from my garden at home. It's a 7.1. That's a little bit more alkaline than I would like for it to be. If I were growing potatoes, I might have problems with scab because potatoes don't like alkaline soil. I would really like that number to be 6.5 if I could just, pull it out of the air. And this is why I'm using an ammonia sulfate for my fertilizer, because the sulfur in the ammonia sulfate gradually brings the pH down a little bit. Now, I will tell you, it's hard to make a strong pH shift with dirt. There's a lot of buffering capability in the soil, and particularly if you get your pH too high, which is why I said don't add lime unless you know you need it. Because if you get your soil overly alkaline, it is a lot of work to get it back where you wanted it to be. The other thing you want to look at on this soil test is down here in the crop notes. So, one thing you needed was up here at the top, and the other thing you needed was down here in the bottom. And the stuff in the middle, it's interesting if you're into that soil chemistry. If you're not, you don't need to know. Don't get upset if you can't read it. So crop notes, it says apply 2 pounds of urea or 3 pounds of 3400 or 3.5 pounds of 2700 per 1,000 square feet before planting. At flowering, it needs to stimulate growth. Give it a pound of urea, a pound and a half of 3400, or 1.8 pounds of 2700. So again, go back to your bag of fertilizer and say, well, I'm not using any of those, I'm using 1500. Just take 28, divide it by 15, and multiply it by that number of pounds. It's pretty simple math. Just proportion it out. When in doubt, don't under apply. So if it's like, I don't really know, do the best you can with the calculation and then back off a little bit, because you'll do less damage by putting in not quite enough than you will from over applying. The other thing about applying nitrogen to your soil is water the soil well before you put it on. Put the fertilizer on and then water it again. If you know there's a big rain coming, maybe don't put it all on just before the kind of rain we had last week, because you'll just wash it all back out. But you do want your soil moist when it goes on. And the reason for that is if the concentration of ions in the soil is too great, it draws water out of the roots of your plants and it can desiccate the plants in what they call root burn. Any questions about that? Did I confuse you more than the extension office does? Yes, Linda?
So what about your flowers that are coming up now?
Uh-huh.
Can you go ahead and put that around them?
Yes, you can. Don't dump it right at the roots. Just kind of circle it around. I always say, no more than about a quarter cup per plant. Did that help? If you put it right on the plant, it can kind of burn the foliage where it goes on. So just do a nice little circle around. Yes, ma'am.
You're pretty safe just always putting compost to go to your line or,
Yes, you are, and that'll be a slide. That'll actually be our next slide.
And then one more question.
Yes,
about
ma'am.
Nourishing, if you don't have it, if you're not gonna be able to do testing or whatever, can you say, I'm seeing plenty good amount of worms, we're good? Is that an indication that things are well or no?
If you have a good amount of worms, that is an indication that your soil has good drainage and there's enough air in the soil. So your soil texture is good. It does not necessarily tell you that you have the right nutrients for the plant, because your soil's healthy, but it might be a little hungry. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so if I'm trying to figure out how much soil, how much fertilizer. Actually, okay, so it says here that I'm going to use 3 pounds of a fertilizer that is 3400. Well, I don't have that. That's yard fertilizer. I am an organic gardener, and I am using soil moist nitrogen, which is a 1300 fertilizer. So how do I figure out from this test report how much of this fertilizer to use? I take actually any one of these, but let's just say my report calls for 3.5 pounds of 2700. Okay, 27 is about twice as much as 13. So if I take 27 and I divide it by 13, I'm going to come out with 2 point something. And I'm going to multiply it by the number of pounds that it told me to use of the stronger fertilizer. And so if I needed 3.5 pounds of the 27%, because that's what that means, is that fertilizer was 27% nitrogen and it had no phosphorus or potassium. If I needed 3.5 pounds of the 27% product, I probably need about 7 pounds of the 13% product. Does that make a little more sense? Yes.
Can you use multiple lesser applications?
Well,
Let's say you have
My
you have
or-
a 10-0-0 or something, or, you can.
okay, if I was using a 10-0-0, then I would take 27 and divide it by 10.
Like, is it better to apply it and then 2 weeks later do another application? You're doing less, you're underfeeding it.
You can do that if you want. Like if the soil needs 7 pounds per 1,000 square feet And you don't have to add it all at once, that is correct. Now,
Is there benefit to it?
huh?
Is there a benefit to?
Not really, as long as you can water it in well. Now, if you, for example, if you can't water it in well, then yes, the benefit, what I would say is put in a little bit and do it over time, so you don't get your concentration too great. If we are, for example, I planted onions in the botanical garden a couple of weeks ago before all the rain came in. And I said, and our water was off that week because we had a water break. And I said, we're gonna plant the onions, but we are not gonna fertilize them today. We're not gonna fertilize them until either Cesar gets the water line fixed or we've got rain coming in. And I did wait until the day before the rain came in to put the fertilizer down. So yes, if you've got unusual weather problems or your water line, or you haven't got the hose out yet, yes, put in less or even wait and delay putting it in. Yes.
Okay, so I wish I had attended this call, this chat, 2 months ago. Because I just had some landscaping people come in. We planted some plants,
Right.
put the fabric that they put over it, and then put, the,
Mulch on top of the fabric,
can I do any of this?
Well, the first thing I will say is I don't really recommend landscape fabric. So if you have a nice big hole, like a 3-foot hole cut around each plant, the landscape fabric isn't gonna hurt it. If the landscape fabric comes all the way up to the stalks, the stem, the trunk of your plant, then I would get out there with a good stout pair of scissors and I would cut the fabric back.
They told me they had applied fertilizer, so they applied.
They probably put it down before they put, so what you would do probably at this point is I would check and make sure that fabric doesn't come too close to this trunk of the plant, because you can have root rot from that. The plants need to breathe. We have a rose garden over at the extension office that is a memorial rose garden, and when it was put down, they put landscape fabric all the way up to the main trunk of the roses. And those roses were not happy, they were not looking good. And about 4 years ago, we went in there and literally we just took heavy duty scissors and we cut each rose bush a nice big hole. And we pulled the fabric back and we put some compost down and we put some mulch down and we gave the roses an organic fertilizer that was fairly low concentration, because I'm having to put it right up there in the root zone. And we gave them, to your point, about half as much as we knew it needed, and then we waited a couple of months and we gave it some more. The roses are much happier now. So, landscape fabric can suffocate your soil. It can suffocate your plants. I know why people use it, because they don't want to weed, but it is worthwhile going out there and just with your finger, kind of rake back the mulch and make sure that your plant's got some breathing room. And do you need to add fertilizer this year? I would wait about 3 to 6 months and take a soil sample and, sample the soil around your breathing area and then see what it might need, which may be nothing. But if they fertilize it this year, you probably should not do anything else to it until you know what your soil test says. Okay? Any other questions? These are very good questions. Thank you guys for bringing it up, because it makes the talk more interesting. And there's always stuff I forgot, left out, didn't remember to put in there. Okay, adding compost. To your comment about adding compost, it's always okay to add compost. But when you add that compost, be aware that you're probably not giving your plant full fertilizer. Compost its main benefit to the plant is to provide air and water to the plant roots, keeps the clay from becoming too compact, and it keeps sandy soil from drying out too fast. It adds nutrients to the soil, but it is a fairly low level, so you may still need fertilizer, particularly the nitrogen. And there's no wrong time to add compost. It's usually easier to add it when the garden space is open before you put in a new crop. And that's usually what I do when I clear out, for example, my spring greens. I'll clear a space in the garden, I'll work some compost in, and then I'll plant the next crop. If you're adding compost to trees, shrubs, or existing plants, Maritza, this is a comment for your question. Take care not to pile it up right against the trunk or the stem of the plant. You don't want to bury that plant deeply. You don't want to make a mulch volcano. But it's always okay to add an inch or two. Planting annuals, pay attention to the temperature, not what's on sale at the garden center. We've talked about this is not the time of year to plant impatiens. That is a soil thermometer in the photograph there, and I brought a couple of them if y'all want to look at them after the talk. But I really believe in my soil thermometer as far as telling me when to plant things. The 10-day forecast and the nighttime temperatures can be off by a few degrees. Nighttime temperatures are more critical than daytime temperatures. And then check your soil temperature because it changes slower than the air temperature. For example, I checked soil temperature last Tuesday morning before I gave a talk on tomatoes to the Rogers Garden Club. And soil temperature in my garden was 54 degrees. And I went in and told them, ladies, it's not warm enough to plant tomatoes yet. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Went out this morning because I was curious as to how much it had dropped. It had dropped 10 degrees. And you say, oh, well, I thought you said soil temperatures were stable. Well, think about it. The air temperature dropped 40 degrees from last Tuesday. So your soil temperature is a very good indicator of whether or not the soil is warm enough to plant a particular crop. This is just some information on what crops like what temperatures. If I was planting today, I would plant arugula and peas. I know I planted onions 2 weeks ago, but they're probably shivering and cussing me today. Radishes and beets, they also like about 50 degrees. And tomatoes want 60 to 65 degree temperatures for their planting. So, you know, that's why I say wait until at least May to plant your tomatoes. But this is just this is a good guideline that I pulled together from a bunch of different sources as far as what crops prefer what soil temperatures. Now, I will say if you get your crop in and you get it well established, like I have in my garden right now, I've got kale, spinach, and a cold weather tolerant lettuce called Rouge de Vert. And all three of those came through that frost this week just fine. I didn't even cover them with frost cloth. They were fine. But they've been out in the garden for a while. Their roots are well established, and they've adjusted to the colder temperatures. I probably wouldn't plant have planted fresh lettuce seedlings yesterday. I would have said, I'm going to wait till it warms up a little bit. But the seedlings that had been out there for a couple of weeks were fine. So any other questions about spring before we move to summer? Yes, ma'am.
So the planting doesn't matter if it's seed or I get some starter seed that are already cropped.
Mm-hmm.
The same kind of soil temperature needed.
The seeds are probably more particular about when they will germinate. But, you know, for example, lettuce will germinate at 75 degrees, but it's not happy at 75 degrees. So I kind of use these numbers for both seeds and transplants, but I know, for example, with lettuce, you know, if you look at that lettuce line, it says plant or set out when the soil is between 50 and 70, and you say, my goodness, that's kind of a wide range. There are lettuce varieties that do just fine here in the summertime. And Swiss chard, for example, does just fine here in the summertime. Spinach will bolt here in the summertime. So these temperatures are probably pretty good for both. The nice thing about seeds is if it's only cold for a day or two, they'll just wait and they'll come up. Where with the transplant, if it's really unhappy, it'll go ahead and die. We planted pea seeds in February at the botanical garden because it was really warm in February. It's like, okay, we'll go ahead and plant the peas. And they didn't come up, and they didn't come up, and they didn't come up. And I thought, oh, well, they rotted in the ground. So I planted another round, and the temperature hit just where they wanted it to be. They all sprouted. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any recommendations of where to find a good quality compost?
That is a very good question.
My backyard.
Yeah, if you can grow your own, it's wonderful.
Yes.
I have had good luck with the composted mulch and more. I've heard White River's compost is good. I have heard that Vocal's compost is good. We use compost from the city of Bentonville at the Master Gardeners at their garden at Helping Hands, and it has always been good for us. I will say I had a negative experience with the food compost from Food Loops in Fayetteville. It doesn't want to get wet. I don't know what's wrong with it. It acts like it's got maybe all that cooking oil. It's got it waterproof. But we put a lot of that in the beds at the botanical garden, and I'm having to water a lot more this year. Once I got it wet enough, the plants are growing okay. But
Yeah, I love White River, so I'll probably.
Okay. Well, but you know, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I want a quart of compost, and I'm going to take it home and test it. And you just take it home and plant 4 bean seeds or some radish seeds in it, and see if they sprout well. And if they don't buy it, because you know you spend $1,000 on a dump truck load of compost. You want to make sure it's good. Any other questions? Yes.
How about the, the smaller plants that, we use in cooking, like basil and rosemary and.
Your herbs, yes.
The herbs, yes.
Okay. Basil and rosemary like warm weather. I would wait another month before I set those out. Sage is incredibly cold tolerant. The sage at the botanical garden made it all the way through the winter, even in the negative degrees, and it was fine. Chives are incredibly cold tolerant. You can plant those now. It is a good time to plant parsley and oregano is a good time. What is the one that looks like cilantro? Cilantro. Those are actually cool weather vegetables, cool weather herbs, and won't do real well here in the hot summertime. People come to the botanical garden and say, how can I grow cilantro in the summertime? I said, grow it inside under a grow light, because when it gets 90 degrees, it's gonna flower and die. But I would plant all of my herbs now except the basil and the rosemary, and I would wait a little bit on those.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
In my lawn, I've got a lot of diggers,
Uh-huh.
and the squirrels are going to my old flower pots, and I thought, oh, my morning glory seeds, and they have just made a mess of things.
Uh-huh.
How do you?
Well, in pots, I take chicken wire, and I lay a piece of chicken wire over the pot, and I kind of take my hands and crimp it around the rim. And then if I really am having problems, I will take some earth stakes and I'll put those down in the pot. And the plants come up pretty well through the chicken wire, but the squirrels have trouble digging into it. Okay, summer, here you're talking at the very earliest, the 1st of May. And remember, if you'll go buy a cheap soil thermometer and check your soil temperatures, that will give you better guidance. But you want to transplant your peppers, tomatoes, and eggplant. I strongly recommend you stagger your planting of your tomatoes. Don't go out and buy a 6-pack of all the same kind and put them in the garden on the same day, because you're either going to win the lottery and have more tomatoes than you know what to do with, or they're all going to die on the same day. What I like to do is stagger my planting. I'll put out maybe 2 of the same kind, and then 6 weeks later I'll put out 2 of a different kind. or I'll put out my first planting will be a short season like an early girl, and then a longer season like a Arkansas Traveler, because the early girl will start producing at 50 days, and the Arkansas Traveler takes nearly 80 days. So about the time the early girl's taking a break, the Arkansas Traveler comes on, and by then I've planted 2 more of something else, and so I'm staggering my plantings and I'm hedging my bets. And I just have much better results that way. They just don't all seem to get sick and die on the same day. Cucumbers and squash can be planted directly from seed or transplanted. And again, stagger your plantings, because I always thought I didn't know how to grow cucumbers, because they would grow and they would cover me up with cucumbers, and then I'd walk out one day and the vines would be dead. And that would be the end of it. And I thought I was doing something wrong. No, cucumbers just have a short life cycle, so what I have found is if I plant half my cucumbers and then I'll wait maybe 2 weeks and plant the other half of the trellis, then I'll have a 2-week longer cucumber season. Or if I want to break it into thirds, I'll have a longer season. But cucumbers they're short-lived. They produce heavily for a little while, and when they're done, they're done. And it wasn't anything you did wrong, they've just reached the end of their life cycle. So if you want cucumbers over a longer period of time, just stagger your plantings. Yes, ma'am?
Why do the cucumbers turn into little balls?
It could be the variety. Okay, there's a couple of things that can cause that. There's 3 things I know of. One is some cucumbers, that's just what they do. Like the lemon cucumber really just makes a ball. The other one is if you're not getting a good pollination, because cucumbers have a male flower and a female flower. And the female flower has to be visited multiple times by a bee that has landed on a male flower to get good complete pollination. So if your pollination is not real good, you won't get a full formation of the fruit. And the third one is when your vines reach, I think the fancy term for it is senescence, but they get close to the end of the lifespan, they're not sending nutrients up well to the vine, and so that little cucumber's not getting very well fed. And so you will notice that sometimes toward the end of the growing season. And again, it's just that's what cucumbers do. And if you have staggered your plantings, then you can just say, I'm not even going to pick anything off this section and go down to the others. Yes, Maritza?
Like with flowers, you're always looking to see which direction they would do best in. Like most hydrangeas would be under, direct hot sun. You would plant facing south.
Mm-hmm.
I suffer that. With vegetables, is that a consideration or it doesn't matter?
Oh, no, it definitely is a consideration with vegetables. A leafy green vegetable will do okay in 3 to 6 hours of sunlight. But if it's a vegetable that is from the fruit, like a tomato is from the fruit, the cucumber is from the fruit, you need 8 hours of sunshine. And most of the summer vegetables do not care if they're on the hot southwest side of the house. They like it better over there. So the main advice I give people about their vegetable garden is just don't put it up against your solid board fence, because that fence is going to shade it half the day. Put it 3 to 6 feet out from the fence so it can get the sun better. Better yet, put it in the middle of the yard. Yes, I know you're going to have to mow around it, but if you want good tomatoes, if you want good cucumbers, you need at least 8 hours of sun. And again, with the summer vegetables, they don't care if it's hot. They like it. Now, they're going to need to be watered, but they like the hot sun. They're tropical plants. They're from, the tropical regions of the world originally. So they like the heat. They have to grow cucumbers inside greenhouses in England to get enough heat to get the poor things to bloom. All right, if you're gonna grow sweet potatoes, those, remember, you plant them when the kids are getting out of school and you harvest them when they've gone back to school. So you're gonna plant them around mid-May and harvest them just before frost. They love hot weather. If you're going on a long vacation this summer and you still wanna grow something in the vegetable garden, plant sweet potatoes and just go away and leave them alone. And they will be perfectly happy because the vines grow so thickly, they smother out the weeds, and they grow so fast that the Japanese beetles can't keep up with them. Okra also likes hot weather. Okra won't grow well for you if you plant it too early. If you're having trouble getting your okra to germinate, soak the seeds overnight, and you can plant that either from seeds or set out directly. Summer flowers, dahlias, impatiens, caladiums, and cannas, do not put those out right now. They have no cold tolerance at all. Plant those when you would plant the sweet potatoes. Same thing with ornamental sweet potatoes, mid-May, earliest you want to set those out. Now, if you want to put something out now that will last through the summer, marigolds, petunias, and believe it or not, lantana are all surprisingly cold tolerant. Because if you think about that, that's some of the last things that are blooming in your garden in the fall are those marigolds. And lantana actually is a perennial in the Little Rock area and south. So if you've got a container and you're just dying to plant something, these are in the stores now, and these will actually weather the cold pretty well. Zinnias, vinca, and angelonia are heat tolerant and drought tolerant. So if you've got that container, as Maritza said, on the southwest side of the house, and you want to put something in there that doesn't wilt in the afternoon, these are good options. One thing you want to do in the summertime is you want to avoid planting or transplanting anything other than annuals and ornamental grasses. So this is not the time, the hot part of the summer is not the time to dig up your grandmother's peony and move it. It is, not the time to put out a new apple tree in the hot part of the summer. That needs to be a spring or fall activity. Grasses, actually, though, if you want to divide your big clump of miscanthus, or you want to set out a new planting of a native grass for your prairie garden, do it in the summertime because that's when their roots are active and that's when they really like to get in and get settled. I have killed ornamental grasses in the past trying to dig them up and transplant them in the fall because I transplanted them just about the time they said, nope, not doing anything, and they rotted in the ground that winter, and so I had to try them again. It's the time to plant warm weather vegetables, heat-loving flowers, Mediterranean tropical herbs, to speak to your, when do you plant rosemary? Don't plant trees and shrubs in the hot part of the summertime. If you're at Lowe's, and they're having a wonderful sale on azaleas. Restrain yourself. If you feel like you absolutely must buy them, take the pots, put them in a semi-shaded part of your yard and water them every day, and wait until like September to plant them. But I would really recommend you just put your hands in your wallet in your pocket and walk away because your chances of getting them to live through nurse them through a hot, dry summer if you've just set them out is not good. Okay, watering, you're gonna need to water everything that you planted in the spring. Trees, shrubs, perennials, vegetable garden, you're gonna have to water. Your vegetable garden and flowers will need water anytime the top 3 inches of the soil dries out. Drip irrigation is a lot more efficient, save your water bill, reduces disease spread. You're gonna have to water container grown flowers and vegetables probably twice a day. We water the raised beds at the botanical garden. We've got them on a timer and they get watered twice a day. Soaker hoses and inexpensive timers are going to be your friend this time of year. Just the cheap black soaker hoses are fine. You don't have to get real sophisticated with your drip irrigation setup. And the inexpensive timers are fine. I recommend, even if you're going to be home, if you get one of those cheap, twist it for an hour timers, because what that will save you for doing is forgetting you left the water on, and then at 10 o'clock that night, it's like, oh my gosh, I left the water on, and you're out there in your pajamas and slippers turning the water off, and your water bill is not nice the next month. So those cheap timers will definitely save you some money. Summer is the time when you patrol for pests. Those nasty looking things in the upper right are squash bugs. Whether you garden organically or whether you just, you're an expert, you grab the sprayer and you've got a pesticide license. The first thing to control in pests is, one, find the infestation early, and two, correctly identify what you're dealing with. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from people who are scared to death because they found a ladybug larva in their garden, because ladybug larvas are ugly, gnarly looking things. It's like, oh my gosh, what's that pest? It's like, don't spray it, that's your friend, leave it alone. So before you try and spray something, make sure you know what it is and try and catch it early, which means go out and look at the garden a lot. What I like to use for squash bugs is, and you'll laugh at this is the best weapon for squash bugs, a lint roller. And if you don't use a lint roller, duct tape works just fine. But you just, you flip the leaf over and you see the eggs, and it's like, whoosh, run that, much easier than trying to pick them off and squish them by hand. You just swoop them up and then you throw the whole thing in the trash. And it works on the bugs too. It's good. It's better if you can find them at the egg stage, but if you see the bugs, it works on them as well.
They don't walk off the lint roller, they're,
Beg pardon?
they don't walk off the lint roller because they're squirmy.
It works pretty, if the lint roller isn't sticky enough, use duct tape. They will not work off duct tape. The lint roller is just a little bit easier, but, a lady from Texas told me the duct tape trick. Tear a piece of duct tape, wrap it around your hands, and then I was reading in a garden magazine and it said lint roller, and I thought, well, that might be easier, and I tried it and it works well too. But one or the other, that is a great way to get bugs in your garden. It also works well for hornworms. If you don't like to touch those, just get them on the sticky tape. If you're not sure what you have, you can take a picture on your phone or get a sample in the bag and take it to your extension office. I like to use barriers like netting tunnels and floating row crops for flea beetles and cabbage loopers. I will leave those net tunnels over the squash until I see a good crop of female flowers, and then I'll take them off because they have to be fertilized. And I will leave them on the eggplant all summer long, because eggplants have a perfect flower because they're in the nightshade family, so they've got male and female pollen in the same flower, and you can fertilize those by just giving them a good shake. So you just walk by and bat the netting tunnel. It's great for flea beetles. Aphids were really bad last year. Best thing for aphids is just take a spray nozzle, put it on your garden hose, and hit those things with a hard spray of water. And if you'll go out every day or so and do that, it's a lot less hassle than getting out the sprayer and mixing up the insecticidal soap, which is another good thing for aphids if you don't want to use the sprayer. But you don't have to break out the 7 dust to deal with an aphid infestation. Now, when I grew up, you weren't a good gardener if people didn't walk out in your garden and it looked like it had snowed because you put so much 7 dust on your garden. And we know now that's not the way to do it, but I'm that old. Okay, harvesting. Keep your vegetables harvested. I think I repeated a lot of the stuff that was in the last slide. But keep your vegetables harvested regularly, particularly with cucumbers. You've got to harvest those babies every day. Because if you leave mature fruit on the cucumber vine, cucumbers they like to turn up their toes anyway. They will just say, I have procreated, I have set seed, my job is done, I can quit. So keep them picked every day. Okra's the same way. It will go from, this long to that long in one day. So keep those picked if you want to keep your vines producing. Crops that are bearing heavily should be lightly fertilized about every 4 to 6 weeks. That's crops in raised bed and in the ground. If you're growing these in pots, you're probably gonna need to fertilize them once a week to once every 2 weeks. When your bush beans and your cucumbers stop bearing new fruit, when they stop flowering well, they are done. Bush beans are kind of like cucumbers. They're very short-lived. They produce marvelously for a short period of time. When they stop flowering and setting fruit, pull them up, get them out of there, either plant another crop of beans or plant something else in their spot. This is also a good time to put your compost down. Now, if your tomato plants stop bearing during the hot weather, I think we talked earlier, or maybe it was a conversation I was having with someone else, they won't set fruit when the nighttime temperatures are 75 degrees or warmer. So if it's July and you know it's 80 degrees at night, and all of a sudden your plants still look good, but they're not setting any new fruit, you're just gonna have to be patient. As long as the plants look good, they will start setting fruit again in a couple of weeks when the night temperatures drop. However, if you go out there, they're not setting fruit, they look awful. Obviously, they've got blight or something. This is a great opportunity to just pull them out, get rid of them, burn them. And then you can put some more plants in somewhere else in the garden or in a pot. Something that Mitch Wright told me that I did not really realize, but Mitch taught ag at Springdale High for, I think, 25 years. But he said, you know, your best fruit from a tomato plant comes early in the year when the roots are in great shape. The fruit clusters are not too far up the stem from the roots. And he said, if you'll watch those tomatoes, as the summer goes on, the fruit gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And he said, so if you just leave a plant there that you put out in May, and you're expecting it to still bear well in September, you're probably not going to get that. If it's a long season tomato like a Cherokee Purple or a German Johnson, yes, it may not get its first crop on there until late in the season. But if this tomato's been producing for you all season long and the fruits are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and the plant's getting scrawnier and scrawnier and scrawnier, just go ahead and pull it out. Pull it out, throw it on the burn pile, use that space for something else. And that's why I say stagger your tomato plantings. Fall, it's a good time to grow vegetables in northwest Arkansas because September and October, the weather gets nice again. Those empty spots in the garden where you pulled out the cucumbers and tomato plants, great place to put radishes or turnips or mustard or collards or Swiss chard. You want to remember to harvest your sweet potatoes before the first frost, and that's our sweet potato crop at the Botanical Garden last year. That whole batch of sweet potatoes came out of a little bed that was 2.5 feet wide and 8 feet long. They loved that. It was a 3.5 foot deep raised bed. They loved that deep, soft soil, and we like to never got the sweet potatoes out of that bed. I thought we were going to have to dig to China to get them all out. But again, if you want to go on vacation and still have a vegetable garden, plant sweet potatoes. In fall is the time to plant garlic if you like to grow your own herbs. And remember, you'll plant garlic in September and you probably won't harvest it until July. So put it in a corner of the garden so it's not right where you wanted to plant tomatoes next year. Stick it over in the corner or in the edge.
I tried the garlic and my peas wouldn't grow near them. They
Really?
didn't like each other.
Okay. Well, I don't know why, but that's good information.
I thought I put the garlic and onions on the perimeters, the rabbits, and who got the rabbit fencing.
Uh-huh.
Put them in. And I thought that's a good place to plant for peas. Didn't like it.
Okay. Good to know. I usually put mine, I've got one low bed and I usually put mine in there, kind of alternate it one year with peppers and the next year with garlic. But, I mean, the main thing is garlic is like babies and baby calves. It takes about 9 months. So where you plant it. Another thing about garlic, if you're concerned about what you're planting it to, it does very well in large white nursery pots. So if you're concerned about planting it too close to something it might not like, that would be an alternative. Another thing to do in the fall is make a sketch or take photos of your vegetable garden. And the reason for that is you want to remember where you planted what this year, because next year you're going to rotate it. So sometimes it's hard for me to remember. Now let's see, did I put the cucumbers there last year? Because I've already taken my trellis down, of course. Or am I remembering year before last? So just a very good thing to do, late summer, early fall, just take your phone and snap a couple of pictures so you can go back and look and say, oh no, the cucumbers were there last year, because you want to rotate your main 3 families. All right, we're in late fall. It's a good time to plant evergreen trees, shrubs, and spring blooming bulbs. Good time to set out winter red twig dogwood. Again, don't put out the marginally hardy things like big leaf hydrangeas and figs. If you want to make changes to your hardscape, this is a good time. It's actually better to build walls and sidewalks and so on and so forth in the fall, because it's pretty dry here in the fall. And so you don't have to worry about, oh, I can't, level this out, dig that out because the ground's too wet. It's a good time to put down a fresh layer of mulch when you pull out your summer annuals. It's a good time to put out your winter annuals like pansies and ornamental kale, because they're going to last longer if they can get their roots established. If you want to try a winter vegetable garden, I can grow spinach here all through the winter, whether it gets down below 0 or not. Usually my winter garden, I'll plant bok choy, I'll plant Swiss chard, I will plant kale, and I will plant spinach. And I will plan to get the bok choy and the Swiss chard out of the garden by Thanksgiving. I will plan to get the kale out of the garden by Christmas, and then I will leave that spinach in the garden all year long with just a frost cover over it, and that's where my salads come from in January, is the spinach that was out in the garden. They are amazingly cold hardy, and I did not realize that when I started gardening. You want to take up your soaker hoses and drain your irrigation system before the temperatures drop to freezing. Put a little, styrofoam cover over your outdoor spigots. Okay, winter in the garden. Everybody says, oh no, I don't do the garden in the winter. No, you've got gardening work to do in the winter. If you planted shrubs or trees in the spring or the fall, you've got to keep them watered, because a lot of times we have a winter like this last one where we were way behind on our water and our rainfall until the last deluge. But you're going to have to go out on a warm day, connect the hose, water the plant, disconnect the hose, and recover your spigot, because it's going to get cold again. Continue spreading compost and mulch. You can plant spring bulbs probably up until December here. I know they go in the store in August. August isn't a good time to plant bulbs. Really, November is a better time. You can do your soil sample. If you don't want to do it in the spring, do it in the fall. They come back from the lab faster. Plan your garden. It's a good time to order seeds. Go out there and remove the dead annuals and the vegetables that didn't get cleaned up in the fall, because I will tell you, it is much more encouraging to plant your spring garden when you go out and the beds are nice and clean and you clean them off and you put straw down, and versus, oh my gosh, I've got to pull up those dead tomato plants. Why didn't I do that last year? Now, I will say, if you have perennials and you have particularly native perennials, try not to cut those down in the fall unless it's someplace where you absolutely have to do that, because that is where a lot of our native bees and beneficial insects overwinter, is in the stems of the native plants. So if you do have to cut them down, if you can leave about a foot of stem, that gives them the bumblebees and the native pollinators a place to overwinter. And then winter's a great time to look at the landscape and say, stand back and look at it. I need something over here to balance that something over there. Gives you all winter to kind of think about it, do some research, try and find the plants you want so you're ready to go in the springtime. These are some useful books that I just keep in my garden library. The Market Gardener is written by a man who does vegetable gardening up in Canada, and you would say, well, that can't be very helpful. If he can get it through a Canadian winter, he can tell you how to get it to grow down here. I like Joe Lample's vegetable gardening book. Vegetable Gardening in Arkansas is a wonderful reference. It's out of print right now. But, if you can find a copy somewhere, scoop it up. I find them in the used bookstore down in Fayetteville occasionally. Dixondale Farms has an online website devoted to how to grow onions. There's nothing about growing onions the people at Dixondale don't know. The University of Arkansas Extension Service website, all the stuff that we used to have to go to the office to get pamphlets, it's all online now. So that's a great reference place. And then if you want to grow sweet potatoes, George's plant farm website called Tater School is a great place. That's everything I know about growing sweet potatoes I learned from George. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
If I have established, trees, even small trees, like I have a little red maple that hates growing but comes up every year, should I be watering them during the winter?
If it is an established plant, you probably don't have to water it during the winter, but you do need to water it in the summertime. I lost an established red maple, little Japanese maple last summer because we had some tornado damage and I just got distracted and didn't water it. It was a 5-year-old plant and I lost it. So if it's an established plant, water it in the summertime. You probably don't have to water it in the wintertime. If it's less than 2 years old, I would water it in the wintertime.
How about hydrangea trees? Like limelight hydrangeas, because hydrangeas are always so thirsty.
Okay, the limelight hydrangea is a paniculata hydrangea, which is different from the big leaf or the macrophyllus. They are much tougher. You need to water a paniculata again. The first 2 years it's in the ground, you need to water it year round. After that, I only water mine if it's really hot and dry while it's blooming. If the blooms start to look a little droopy, I'll give it a drink just to make it look prettier. But once you get a PG hydrangea established, it is tough. You'll have a hard time killing it. Yes.
Overwintering.
Yes.
So I've only been able to take rosemary like the second year. It doesn't.
I have the hardest time getting rosemaries to live here. It's just a little bit too cold. The rosemary variety called ARP, A-R-P, is supposed to be the hardiest one.
I put some leaves around it.
That was the right.
Let it see some sunlight.
That was all the right thing to do. It was like 7 below in some parts of this area this winter, and that's just cold for rosemary. I generally plan on replacing mine every year. You can grow it in a pot, and you can move the pot to a warmer space. Janet Carson swears by putting the pots between your foundation shrubs, like if you've got evergreen foundation shrubs, she swears by putting pots between the shrubs in the house. If you've got a crawl space, but if you can put it on the west side of the house, up next to the house. But I don't have real good luck overwintering rosemary up here.
Thank you. Love rosemary.
I do
I
too.
had a horrible squash bug.
Yeah.
Mess. And my garden is small, so I can't really rotate around because there's not enough sun on the far side. And that's like the tomatoes. And this year we have to really try things different. But the whole area that has the squash bugs, they're still in the ground, aren't they?
They're
Can I do something to?
they're still in the
Can
ground.
I put a 7 on it right now before I plant?
If you want 7 in your, doing it right now won't work, because 7 doesn't work on eggs, it only works on live plants, because it's a neurotoxin. I don't really want a neurotoxin in my garden.
How about the essential oils? Can I?
What, neem, would it?
Neem you could do, but again, wait till it's a little bit warmer. You could drench the ground in neem, but I would wait till it's a little bit warmer. I tell you what, I have pretty good luck with squash plants though, is waiting until after 4th of July. because the bugs come up and there's nothing for them to eat, and they starve. And there's just a break in squash, the squash borers are pretty much gone by then, because you've got borers and you've got bugs, and they'll both kill squash. But I have better luck waiting until after 4th of July. And the nice thing about squash is they start bearing so fast, that
And the bugs start growing so fast.
the bugs do start growing fast, but the insect pressure is less later in the summer. So you might try waiting. Hit it with neem early and then wait later.
My neighbor and I noticed the other day, we were chatting about it, that we've been driving around and we see all these little purple flowers in all the lawns, which
Mhm.
we haven't seen before.
Okay.
What's happening to
Well, okay, that's
ecosystem?
nothing bad. What is probably happening is that fewer people are hitting their yards with heavy doses of herbicides. So what you're seeing is either dead nettle or henbit. Both of those look a lot the same. They're an annual weed that comes up in the spring, and you get the pretty little purple flowers, and then as soon as it gets hot, they die. And I just let them go in my yard. They're pretty. If you've got early bees, they feed the early bees. Now if you're a lawn, excuse me, I'm about to use an offensive word. If you cannot abide having anything in your lawn except grass, you probably put pre-emergent herbicides out and you've killed them off. But they don't bother me. I think they're pretty, so I just let them go. And if you've got early pollinators out, you're feeding them, you're not harming the ecosystem. It's not gonna have a negative effect on your Bermuda grass because it's still dormant anyway, so. Yeah, I think what you're seeing, I hate Bermuda grass, but I think what you're seeing is just more people are a little bit more conscious that it's not necessarily a good thing to put to overload their chemicals with, their lawn with chemicals, and so they didn't spray pre-emergents, and, they're not gonna hurt anything. Any other questions? Thank you, I'm sorry I went over time.